Thank you, baby. It's only
Love that
7:30
music.
a.m. for you, Kevin. It's only
Yeah.
7:30.
Thank you. My wake-up
Dog's
call.
crying in the background.
This is the wake up call. Your
Thank
wake up
you.
call today is cut the shit, cue the genius. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us. And we have a very special guest and special to my heart.
Lovely.
And Kevin, thank you for beaming in so early in the morning. I gotta say, for
Only
someone
for
who says,
you.
"Oh, I'm retired," too early. Man, you look great. And
Okay, you don't have to butter me up. I already said
no,
yes during the
Is
show.
that what happens when you retire?
Yeah, you actually become less stressed, so you actually look younger.
Oh, I love that.
so
Uh,
Michelle Bruno, Liz King, who is behind the scenes but totally with us, and myself, Dalia Algazar, would like to welcome Kevin Iwamoto. Did I say it right?
Iwamoto.
Iwamoto
You're right.
on Cut the Shit, Cue the Genius, and we are going to be talking about a very interesting but very critical topic, which doesn't bubble up quite often enough within our industry. But hey, that's why we are on the Cut the Shit show. So we're talking about duty of care, especially in the era and the time that we are in right now, where it is politically charged. There is a lot going on in the world. And when you bring events together and when you bring different people from around the world together, you know, you sort of have to think of things in a different manner. So let's talk first and foremost. Kevin, help us define what is duty of care.
So duty of care is a legal and ethical concept that establishes an obligation, whether it's your employer, whether it's the event organizers, etc., to take reasonable measures to ensure the safety, well-being, and protection of people in your care or those who could be foreseeably affected by your actions or decisions. So it's a fundamental principle worldwide that's used by various professions and industries that emphasizes the responsibility to prevent harm or injury to others is at a high level. That's what duty of care is. So when you say duty of care or DOC, use an acronym, that's what they're talking about, is your responsibility to take quote unquote reasonable measures to ensure the safety, well-being, and protection of people under your care.
And I'm just curious, in a event organization world or ecosystem, who's responsible for that? Like where does it fall under? Who's like, I'm responsible for this? Is this like the CEO's responsibility? Is this, does marketing say, no, event team, this is all you? Or I mean, like, who's the primary person responsible?
So the primary owner of responsibility is the entity that's organizing the event.
Okay.
Right. So they, if anything happens, God forbid, you know, on site or in the planning phases or, you know, in the trip phase, they're ultimately held responsible for any kind of litigation that might arise because of injury, illness, even sometimes death. There has been people who have died. So duty of care is not owned by a singular person. It's owned by the company or organization that's organizing the event. I mean, like it or not, they have. So a lot of them take on insurance and they feel like they're covered. They're covered if something happens, but you know, there are other things that could happen that maybe may not warrant litigation, but nevertheless, they're responsible. Somebody gets sick, you need to get them an ambulance, you need to get them to the closest hospital, blah, 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 blah. So everybody has a piece of this, whether it's the organization at the top, the legal department, and of course, whoever is organizing the event. The responsibility for site selection is really critical when it comes to duty of care, because if you choose, like, let's say a hurricane season, you choose any state along the eastern seaboard and it gets impacted by a hurricane, you're responsible because you're the one who chose that site, right? So if you're thinking about duty of care guidelines, every company also should have duty of care guidelines that should be updated on a regular, frequent basis, right? So if 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 you're consciously booking an event in hurricane season on the eastern seaboard and a hurricane hits and people get displaced or people get harmed, or people get stranded, you are ultimately responsible for all of the above because you didn't do the site selection, you didn't do the due diligence enough during the selection process for the site.
Oh, wow. So that's kind of interesting because you have, new talent coming into the mix here.
Mm-hmm.
And I, I keep wondering whether, this is on top of mind for them.
It
Obviously,
should be. It should be because the
you would
well-being of
think it is.
attendees is. Although I say that, but you see time and time again, like anybody who's handicapped who attends some of these events, a lot of the way the event is structured or whatnot is not conducive for somebody who's disabled, and
Mhm.
their mobility is highly impacted. Even like something as mundane as sitting down on a trade show floor, with somebody in a wheelchair, but the counter is higher because it's meant for people who walk, not people who are in a chair. Or there's
Right.
all kinds of bumps in the carpet and all this other kind of stuff, which makes it very difficult and stressful for them to get around. So it should be, but again, there's so many things that people just, I don't want to say ignore. It's not top of mind for them, right? It's just when you're in execution mode, you have so many, as an event manager and planner, you have so many things you have to tick off. It's one of the tick boxes, but I don't think people pay enough attention to it.
So how does so that we're talking about the obligations from an event planner's perspective.
Hmm.
How about the obligations of the venues? Because the
Yes.
venues should be already like well prepared.
Yes.
Oh, you're coming through hurricane season?
Yeah.
Well, take a look at this. This is our duty of care kind of guidelines that
Yeah.
should be offered back to them. Or
Yeah.
like accessibility, here's everything that we can do, or here's some,
Yeah.
ideas for you to take
Yeah.
in consideration, da da da,
Yeah.
all of that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
do you think the venues, hotels or like convention centers, I mean, we've been talking about accessibility for a very long time.
Yeah.
Joan has been a champion about this
Yes.
for a huge amount of time, and we're
Yes.
still talking about it. It
Yeah.
seems like, Bruno, that this is a theme of the Cut the Shit show. We
Mm-hmm.
bring in topics that have been discussed for a very long time within the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
yet are we moving fast enough? Are we not
Yeah.
like listening? Are we just looking at it because of the dollars? What are we doing? What are we not doing?
Well, not enough attention is being, it's not really taken seriously. And nothing ever is, whether it's duty of care or anything else, until something awful happens. And then people reflect and go, oh gosh, we might have been able to do something more.
Mhm.
Or how could we allow this to happen? And, I don't mean to scare anybody, but this is the Cut the Shit show.
No, I want you to scare them.
So
Scare them shitless right now.
the thing is, what really irritates me is, duty of care before was a very, I don't want to say pie in the sky, but it was, everybody knew it was an obligation. There were several very well known lawsuits that came up because the organizer or company didn't care. I think the one that was really public was the one, there was an oil company headquartered in the UK who sent one of their people to the Middle East. The man was taken hostage and they had no crisis plan on hostage extrication. And so instead of jumping right in and trying to get him extricated as soon as possible, it took days, even weeks to get it because they were totally caught unprepared. So anyway, long story short, he goes back to the UK and he sued them and got millions of pounds because of negligence. They did not,
Wow.
they sent him on a trip, but they didn't have all the right backups to assist him if something went wrong. So this is a common theme that I see in duty of care. Why do we have to wait until something goes wrong before some action that's reasonable and logical takes place? And a lot of it is profit driven. Well, that costs a little bit more, or well, what are the odds of that happening? Let's just tick the box and say we looked into it, even though we didn't really look into it. We just asked the question of the event site or the venue, right? So a lot of people are just willing to gloss over and just tick the box, say, well, I asked them and this is what they said. But nobody goes deeper than that, and that's, what really irritates me. And I'll give you a great example. You have children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it in this country our children have to go through active shooter drills? Because it happens in schools of all places, as well as churches and everywhere else. But do you ever ask that question in a duty of care survey of your suppliers or your venues? Would you be prepared if there was an active shooter on site on how to extricate and evacuate and keep people out of harm's way? And better yet, do the attendees know what to do if there's an active shooter? And people say, well, what are the chances of that happening? Okay, so you saw what happened in Maine, right?
Mm-hmm.
There has been an active shooter
Mm-hmm.
every week of this year in some place in the United States where multiples of people were shot and killed. Okay. So children are learning what to do in an active shooter situation. But we in our industries don't even ask the question a lot of times, right? Thinking, what are the remote chances of that happening? And I'm here to tell you, when you have states that have very loose gun laws where people can open carry guns. I had a friend text me from an event he was at saying, this guy next to me has a gun in a holster. He's sitting next to me. I don't feel safe. My response is, get the hell out of there and leave that conference.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he said, if I had known, and this is chilling, if I had known that this was a potential of happening, I would never have attended in person, right? I would have attended virtually, right?
That's if they have virtual, but yeah.
Well, that's even if they have virtual, but let's not get into that. But I'm saying you have to, in this polarized nation that we live in, where states have a lot of state laws that are very discriminating towards, you name it, women, LGBTQ, Asian Americans, African Americans, Latin Americans, anybody who's not white. When you have attendees who fit in those categories and you expect them to come to your event, they need to feel like there's some level of duty of care assessment that has been done in advance, and that the organizers have a plan or contingency should something happen. And this, it rarely happens. How is, it happens in every city, every social strata, every situation. If churches and schools are not sacred, what makes you think that an event site won't be targeted? Because, and it's not so much like, oh, these are, Aryan Nation groups or whatever the case may be. These are lone gunmen with AK-47s, right? Who are, something set them off, or, they have, mental challenges and that have been unchecked, or, are temporarily, off their meds or whatever. And they pick up a gun and they go somewhere where there's people, right? Or they go to the site where they feel a grievance towards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this can happen anywhere. It's by any individual who's just not, in the right state of mind.
So like you're painting the picture of reality right now, and you brought in the whole angle of our kids. And I don't know if anybody actually does that comparison.
Nobody even asked the question.
Nobody even asked the question. So why the hell are we still talking about this not as a priority? Why is it that, is it because our organizations are so laser focused on the revenue? Are they so short-sighted of, that whole protection, and think that, or do they want to point the finger to the venue? It's their responsibility, or is it, I can't put another thing on top of all the responsibilities that my team has, or they're just going to break.
I think it's all of the above, Dahlia. Tragically, it's all of the above. And so when you have a situation that's serious, like ownership of this or consideration of duty of care guidelines or practices, everybody, like I said earlier, has a finger in it, right? So you can't just really point one finger and say, well, it's your fault because you didn't disclose that you cut back on your security detail, because had you told us, we would have brought in our own type of thing, right? Or, I would like to do more security, but I can't because my budget doesn't allow for it. And then you have organizers saying, wait a minute, we're not going to spend extra money on this because the odds of something like that happening are very far in between and remote, right? So it's everybody does this thing and nobody really takes ownership of it. But I think, we need to start asking these difficult questions, right?
Yeah, we
Because
totally do.
well, and so when you're doing your checklist, talking about fire exits and all this kind of, how much does the room hold, and what, doing all of the, how much, can the AV go, and all this other kind of stuff, you need to start asking these things. And the other thing, and this is going to be really touchy, but it's perfect for your
Let's
show.
do it.
So you have states.
Third rail coming up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what gender is the majority of attendees for a lot of events? Ladies?
Yeah.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay.
Are you asking us, or are you like ladies?
Well, I don't know if we call them ladies. But they identify as women.
Women. Great. So women are the largest attendee group for a lot of events, right?
Yeah.
A lot of these women are of childbearing age. So if you're having an event in a state that doesn't really support women's health care, and something happens in the middle of that event, do you have a plan how to extricate that woman in crisis to a point where she can get the right medical attention during the conference? Because it could be a life or death thing, right?
Yeah.
And most people don't think about those things. And you have a lot of states now who have very, different laws around, women's healthcare, abortion, and all these other kind of stuff. So, healthcare services, right? The availability of healthcare services is kind of challenging in some states more than others.
Mhm.
So, but nobody thinks about that. It's until something happens, and you have to extricate or evacuate, a woman in crisis to the closest point where she can get the medical care that she needs and she deserves and she should expect, right? But we live in such a polarized world that everything is either left wing, right wing, somewhere in the middle, and we bring politics into everything. And I'm saying that cut the bullshit, get the politics out. It's about people's well-being, safety, and security. Politics is irrelevant when it comes to people's well-being, safety, and security. I can't say that enough. Cut the bullshit, get rid of the politics, because that has no bearing. In fact, it has a negative bearing on somebody's well-being. If they need help and you're not able to give it because of where you're situated or the circumstances are such, then we've kind of failed, haven't we, in providing duty of care for these people?
Yeah.
So first of all, I think planners are going to be quitting in droves after this show. Anyone who's tuned
I
in,
hope not.
if you're thinking about this as a career choice, I'm not sure if that's the right direction to go. This topic is, and the reality is so nuanced in many ways. I mean, what are the limits? I have read articles over the past years about speakers being served with divorce papers. Where were the duty of care obligations there? Dolly and I have been at conferences where people have died.
Yeah.
Eventually, there's so much written about women being harassed at tech conferences.
Yes.
And like literally where they feel that their personal safety is in jeopardy. But where are the limits? And at the end of the day, what can you do about it? If we wring our hands thinking about all of the possibilities, we would never open the doors again to another event. Yeah. And plus you throw in cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just that is also, layered into this. Yeah. What can and should one do? We can't turn our events over to attorneys.
No.
Because again,
no,
we never have another get together.
Well, you never have a contract done.
Right, exactly.
That's
So
That
that's
event
scary
would go.
right there. So,
So
I mean, like, what's step 1, 2, and 3? Once we leave today, what are we thinking about it? Obviously, being aware of all the scariness out there.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
but what's step 2 and 3 and 4?
if it eases everybody's mind, I'll go back to the word that I use when I describe duty of care: reasonable measures. Right? You can't be perfect. I know event planners have this high threshold of I got to be perfect and then some.
Yeah.
That's why it's one of the most stressful jobs in the world, and I have such a high degree of respect for all of them for what they do. But you do have to do the due diligence around what's reasonable. So if you're an event planner, your duty of care obligations fall under, I want to say, four areas, right? That you should at least take a second look at, right? The first is safety and security, making sure that the venue is safe and secure for attendees by assessing and addressing potential hazards and providing security measures and having emergency plans in place, just in case you have to go to plan B or something else. And event planners are great at coming up with contingency plans. They have to, because not everything is going to go perfect. So just have a plan, or at least have a go-to leader of who's going to be directing the craziness that happens should something happen on site, right? The second is health and medical support, like providing access to medical assistance in case of emergencies, not just first aid stations or defibrillators and stuff, but making sure that attendees are aware of their options if there is an emergency that's, health and medical related, right? Like, who do I go to? Because, if they should know, who's their one throat to choke if they have an medical emergency. Who do they need to contact for help? The communication is the third, informing attendees about safety measures and procedures, as well as, how to contact event staff or security in case of any kind of concerns or emergencies. And then the fourth is risk management, is identifying and mitigating risks associated with the event, such as crowd control, food safety, transportation, things like that. These are things that event planners already kind of do. So it's just, making sure that everybody knows who's on first, what's on second, who to go to if something should happen, and then holding the venues and your supplier partners accountable along with you. Because I guarantee if something happens, it'll be a joint. It won't be just your company that gets sued. It'll also be the venue folks as well. So there's a lot on the table at stake. And I just think event professionals are used to dealing with stuff like this. They just need to do a little bit deeper dive and make sure that, the partners that they select are fully on board and aligned with their plans and their backup plans and contingencies and stuff like that.
I wonder if now, in particular, people are not wanting to pay attention to this topic more than before because it's just so ugly out
Yes.
there.
Mhm.
And to add this on to your regular responsibilities and think about all the crazy shit that is happening, like you mentioned, in schools and shopping malls and in other venues.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I would not want to go there on top of just getting the event off the ground within budget.
I
You
agree,
know?
Michelle. I mean, again, planners have just so much on their plate. It's really a miracle, and it really irritates me. You should do another show about the undervaluation or unappreciation of all of the planning and event people, because they're expected to execute at 100% plus every time.
Yeah.
Every time. There's very little wiggle room for them to escape from, and yet we keep adding more to their plate. But I would just say the ramifications for not taking appropriate care of attendees does lead to serious consequences, both legally, reputationally, and those consequences could include things like legal liability, um, reputational damage, financial costs through legal battles, compensation payouts, increased
And
insurance
also, don't
premiums.
you remember, it used to be that the organization was sued, and
Yeah.
now we have seen, not that long ago, planners personally being sued for over serving attendees and stuff like that, like the planner themselves are now liable in some
Yeah.
cases and have been
Yeah.
sued.
That's always been the case. It's just that people never went there, and now they're going there because people are getting more aggressive when it comes to financial compensation. And so this is why, again, reasonable measures. If you haven't done the due diligence, a thorough due diligence, if they can prove that you didn't pay attention or you didn't take a certain thing serious enough, and that area that you didn't take serious enough went awry and something happened, they're going to suck in everybody. Remember, when people sue, they sue everybody all the way up the food chain because the deeper the pockets, the more they open the scope of who they suck into the lawsuit. I think a lot of times event planners can escape a lot of that just by showing that I did the due diligence. So I can't, this is not a perfect science, and things, shit happens. And so, we did the best that we could and we planned for the best that we could, but it's not like we totally blew this off and ignored it. I think that's the danger right there. If you haven't done better due diligence or ask these difficult questions, then yeah, you might be a party to that lawsuit. But if you can cover your behind and show that we did a copious amount of investigation on our site selection and our venue selection and the programming and all of this kind of stuff, then you kind of have a leg to stand on, and your company is going to expect you to do that to protect them, because they're the ones with the deep pockets. They're the ones with the bigger insurance policies. So anybody who's going to sue is going to go up the ladder to who has the deepest pockets.
Well, I think the venues are going to have to own up quite a bit right now as well.
More
so than before. And I also think, like, with everything that is happening in the world and the emotional impact it has on attendees.
Yes.
Not to add one other thing on event organizers, this is another reason why, for those that ditch their digital, they need to rethink.
Yes, absolutely.
I think that the type of attendees that are going to think twice of going to a show or not feeling safe, and this is where the event destination is going to play a role as well. This is why a lot of, and this could be a different angle, but this is why you have cities like San Fran that are frowned upon, or that has factors that can lend itself to what if scenarios.
Yes.
And when attendees or event participants keep playing the what if scenarios in their mind, something happens, or they're walking down the street, and what if someone attacks me, or this or that, and they don't have, like you said, a solid or confirmed list of, if this happens, this is where you go for help or assistance.
Right.
Or if this happens, here is a number to call, or something like that. Yeah. I rarely actually see any of that information on, on a mobile app.
Yeah, it's bad business.
What?
Well,
it's bad business to go, hey, if you're walking down the street in XYZ city and you get mugged or attacked by a
hang on, is it bad business, or is it is it really bad business though?
It's only bad business if it happens and you did nothing.
So are you going to be tone deaf and say that, yes, our event is happening in San Fran, where we know what is happening in the streets of San Fran, and we're not addressing it? I don't think
I'm wondering, and Kevin, you can weigh in on this. Is this a communication problem?
Yes.
They're not communicating in the first place.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. I think that it could be communicated in a professional but delicate way.
Yes.
Or maybe we shouldn't be delicate.
Yeah, I'm not this is not going to be a meter board with pictures or icons or emojis.
But if it's not, no one will read it. Yeah. Also.
Especially if the mobile app doesn't work, but that's another session.
Okay, so I'm glad you said that, because that's where I was going to go. So where most organizers have, I don't want to say buried it, but kind of put it in play, is in the
No, say buried it, because it's buried.
It is kind of buried. Okay. But you would have to, and the more complicated the app, the worse it is to get access to that information. And you're right, Michelle, it's not important until something happens and you need to find out what to do. And then now you're dealing with an app, like there should be, in my opinion, like a 911 feature on the app saying like wherever you are during the course of the event, you're in peril or you've encountered something serious and you need help. There should be a 911 button that you just push instead of making people scroll through. If somebody gets shot or somebody's lying on the sidewalk, you do not want to be trying to figure out the app to figure out who the hell do I call or what. You should just be able to access the app, 911, boom, somebody is there to kind of say, well, how can I help you? Type of thing.
Yeah,
But
because
Gwen,
a lot of stuff happens and the organizer, the planners don't see it. The
yeah,
attendees see it. It's like a see
attendees see it.
something, say something
Yeah,
sort of thing, or they experience it and they're just like, oh, whatever. I got through it and I'm going to tell my friends around me, don't go down that street.
yeah,
But there's really is no mechanism for, reporting
yeah,
things that are sketchy.
yeah,
And I've been in this business a long time too. I have seen some pretty fucking sketchy
yeah,
stuff
yeah.
that goes down
There is.
behind the scenes in the evenings,
Yeah,
when it's not on the show floor
yeah,
and in a lot of places that,
yeah.
I never thought of that. Yeah.
But the reality is, you cannot guarantee 100% safety for everybody involved, but you do need to give them some sense of security that should something happen, here's what I do, right? And honestly, we went through this, with COVID and with others, like the amount of safety precautions that were taken during COVID,
Yeah.
I thought really changed the industry because people were being extra cautious because they didn't want to infect anybody unintentionally, during events during COVID. And so we kind of know how to do this. We just choose to kind of like, okay, well, what are the chances of this
No,
happening?
we're praying and we're bringing out the crystals
That
and
nothing
the
happens.
oils that nothing happens. And if
Yes.
something happens,
Yeah.
it's not going to
It's not going to end well.
impact the masses.
Well,
And let's see how we can contain it.
well,
But
what I say to, people that I care about and everything is, if your company gets sued for a duty of care breach and it goes to a jury trial, your company will lose that case 90% of the time because they're going to side with the victim.
mm-hmm.
And you're going to end up paying. That's why most of these things don't even go to court. They get settled out of court because the company knows they'll get crucified if they go to a jury trial. So that's how serious this is. And then, Dolly, I want to bring back the virtual component.
Okay.
So one thing that you can do, you should gauge people's safety, feeling of safety and security, where they're at by your event, right? And if they don't feel safe going, you should give them a virtual option to participate, whether that's creating a digital library of the event and everything that happens there, or allowing certain sessions to be both virtual and live so that they can feel like they participated, but they're at their home, safe and secure, versus in a city where they feel insecure. And I will tell you, as one of the rare, Dolly, you, me, and Trevor Louis were talking because we're old pals in IMEX. There's not a lot of folks who look like Trevor and I in this industry, at a very visible level, at an influencer level, put it that way. And I have traveled the world. I've been in the hospitality industry and the airline industry and meetings and events and business travel for most of my adult career. And I have seen the world and I have traveled places and I've been to dodgy places and safe places and beautiful places and stuff like that. I have never in my life and in my career ever felt like I was really unsafe, as an Asian male traveler. I will tell you today, and I hate to admit this, but it is cut the shit. I pick and choose where I go now based on the level of safety and security that I perceive for myself, especially with all the anti-Asian hate thing going on. I mean, people don't care whether you're Chinese, Japanese, Korean. To them, you all look the same. So if I have a grievance against Chinese people, I'm going to take it out on anybody who looks Asian, right? And they don't even understand that there are Asian Americans like me who are third generation. My family has 5 generations in this country, right? So just because I look Asian doesn't mean I am Asian, to culturally, right? I mean, to some degree I am, but I'm
Mhm.
really American. I was, product of the American schooling system. Um, that is very sad for me that I can't just say, oh, there's an event here and it sounds really interesting. The agenda sounds great. I think I'll go, oh, wait a minute. That state has had a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes, just walking down the street, young Asian guy gets stabbed from behind. I don't think I want to put myself in that situation. Right?
No, I feel you and I hear you, and it definitely makes sense. It makes me sad.
Yeah, it's very sad.
And it's a different conversation altogether for the younger ones within our world, and I'm excited that Joan actually is listening in. So she's one of the geniuses listening in as well.
Can we bring up her comments? Because I
Yeah.
think they're
So
really.
and she has amazing comments, and it is a critical time, and when what you are experiencing, Kevin, or what you experience, yes, it's actually experienced by younger attendees or event participants.
Yeah.
I mean, we're bringing it back to events, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, on a global scale, different sentiments altogether, all valid. Um, and, to Joan's point, what are groups planning now for the safety of the Jewish and Muslim participants?
Exactly.
For those that are working in the venue's safety, like even the staff of the hotel.
Exactly.
I honestly didn't see anything our recent show has been IMAX, but this is something that I think anyone putting an event together or any venue hosting an event should be asking the other.
Yes.
So
yes.
And yeah, and I want to just say that something like Muslim and Jewishness sometimes isn't obvious.
No,
If you're
not.
Asian, it's obvious. If you're a woman, it's pretty obvious. If
Yeah.
you're African American, it's pretty obvious. But
yes,
this is something that isn't, like unless you're really thinking about it, it's not obvious.
It's not. And I really think, you have to give the grace and the ability of the attendees to self-select whether they want to potentially put themselves in harm's way, or they don't. They want to go, but they still want to participate. They don't want to go, but they still want to participate. And you have to give them the grace and the acknowledgement that we hear you, we feel you, we'll meet you where you are at your comfort level for safety and security and duty of care.
And what about
I don't
going
see
to
enough
work?
of that.
What if you're an employee in a venue
Yeah.
and you don't feel safe?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's kind of what Joan was asking, right?
That's what Joan
is
is
latitude
talking
given
about.
by those employers, and will organizers understand that maybe the standards of whatever, having your room cleaned or whatever it is, aren't what they are under normal circumstances, whatever that is.
Correct. I mean, this is really sad, but and that Joan and I are very good friends, and she's an ally for the Asian Pacific Islander community, and I'm an ally, for Joan in terms of disabled and faith and everything. But she's right. This intersectionality, and it's not obvious who any of us are: religion, sexual orientation, gender. We're not one thing. But so you have to, if you really want to care, like the word care out of duty of care, you have to meet people where they're comfortable, and you have to acknowledge at least that there is something there that they are concerned about, and it's a serious thing. So this kind of like tone deaf, non-acknowledgement, denial type approach, that is becoming increasingly more difficult to sustain, in my opinion, as you get more incidences of hate and discrimination and stuff. Duty of care, I always tell people when I talk about this publicly, duty of care used to be so easy. It was like, don't book on the on the eastern coastline when it's hurricane season, right? Don't book from like July to whatever, or if there's a war going on in the world, well, don't avoid those countries that surround that country that's having the war, right? Or if there's SARS, don't go to Asia until it used to be kind of like these big broad-based swaths of acknowledgement and stuff. Now it's just so ingrained in our everyday life, that to ignore it or to deny that it exists, like, because of my friendship and respect for Joan, everywhere I go now, I've been wired just based on what I've learned from Joan about, the inaccessibility of so many places. It's like, I never looked at that before because I wasn't aware of it. But when I became an ally, and was blessed to have Joan as a really good friend, I look for those things now, and I actually call it out to whoever wherever the venue is or whoever it is. It's like, this is not friendly to people in who need accessibility, and then there's those who need help, but visually, like to your point, Michelle, they
Mhm.
don't look like they look quote unquote normal, but they're having an emotional crisis, or they're having a schizophrenia crisis, and people
Yeah.
don't know how to help them, and they're traveling, of all things, right? These are some of the people that get on planes and do nutty things, right?
Mhm.
And nobody acknowledged it until they committed whatever they did, and they get arrested when they leave. Which is that the right approach? It's like, if somebody's having a crisis before getting on the flight, then you should help them there, not
Yeah, address
after it
it.
happens. Yeah.
Perfect.
Because the topic is so expansive
Yeah.
and covers so many things, do you all feel, and Joan as well, could this be distilled down to some sort of iconic symbol? And I'm thinking of breast cancer ribbons or, something like that, that people could embrace and identify with, which just says, look, there's a lot of stuff going on. Be more careful than usual in the event. Take responsibility for seeing that people are hurting or things aren't right, or there's a potential for things to happen that we can't possibly be aware, be nicer, be more open. And let's just, focus on something like that. Or is it just too big?
It's too big, but I do think that it boils down to being heard and being seen,
Right.
and we don't do that as a
Yeah,
whole.
I
We
agree.
so you have to expand the being heard and being seen. Joan and I talk about this a lot. Um, it, it it's just the acknowledgement that I see you and I hear you.
Could
You know,
also just be the start, or it could be enough already
hmm yeah,
at events. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
perfect. So
That
what
was going to be our final question, where to go for guidance. But Joan has provided a ton of this, and we're going to put it out there after the show.
yeah,
I can so where you should go for guidance. So first of all, you should
Yeah.
consult with legal experts who specialize in event liability safety regulations to make sure that you're complying with local laws and regulations.
Mhm.
um, B is industry associations. A lot of associations can provide resources and best practices related to duty of care, like ILEA does, and government agencies that are responsible for safety and emergency management can offer guidelines, resources for event planning, especially for large gatherings of public events. There's a lot of security experts, so if you can get access to one, consult with security professionals. I have several friends who are like former Secret Service. One is an LAPD detective. I go to them for like any kind of information I need, specializing in, what additionally can we do to safeguard security at events and to assess risks and implement security measures. They have they have a lot of great information that they can help provide to you. And, there's each other. We have each other. There's books, articles, there's people like Joan, yourself, Michelle, and you, Dahlia, who know so much, and I've always been, throughout my whole career, I've always been very open to sharing best practices or advice just to try to help people. I've always had that part of me that, no matter what I'm doing or where I am, I always want to help people as much as I can. I do tell people that I see them and I hear them, because I actually do. Um,
perfect.
you know,
Well,
so.
thank you. This has been fantastic. Not
Oh,
because I
great.
love you, but I love you, and it's just been. I think it's great that this is one of the touchy subjects and topics that I think it hasn't been spoken about most, or
Yeah.
should be more, so that
Yeah.
we can hear and see people more, especially in our industry. And fantastic. And we got you up so
and
early. I don't know what you're going to do with the rest of your day. So there you go.
I would, Dahlia, and I mean this with all the love, I would
Oh,
only do this for you.
You're so funny.
we all say that, Kevin. We all say that.
Right, Michelle?
Talia, if it wasn't you,
If it wasn't you, answer would be
wouldn't be doing this right now. No, but
I'd be retired and joining Kevin.
Yes, in my retirement.
Music and
all right. So for next week, Bruno, what do we have cooking for next week?
We've got John Fuhr, who's going to talk about some research that he's done last year about space, the impact of spatial design and things on events. And I love that because having a comfy chair is everything for me in terms of being able to relate and environment and just all of that stuff. So we're going to talk about that. And
Michelle, when you talk about that, make sure you ask about accessibility, building accessibility into the spatial design.
Exactly. All of that stuff, just from color to comfort to, accessibility and all that stuff. And I don't think we nearly think as much about that, especially in an industry that for 75 years has had exhibitors in squares. I mean,
at high tabletops.
Bust out. Yeah. Let's bust out of that area.
Yeah,
right? So we're going to talk about that. And we invite Joan back next week.
Perfect.
To weigh in on that.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been an honor and a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
We're thrilled to have you.
Absolutely. And everyone have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we will see you next week. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.